I've been feeling a bit under the weather lately, so let's go for a game that's equally as schnotty. Ghostbusters II, released in 1990 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, courtesy of Activision and Imagineering, the latter being an American outfit, so I guess that's a step up over the previous Ghostbusters game on NES, which was developed by a Japanese developer adapted from a David Crane computer game. And yeah, that wasn't great. So naturally, go for an American developer to make a game based on the American sequel film. Makes more sense than to give Japan another shot, because what did the Japanese know about making a good Ghostbusters game, right? Oh wait. So later that year, HAL Laboratories, yes, that HAL Laboratories, would put on their own take on Ghostbusters 2 called New Ghostbusters 2, which we've previously sampled on this channel many moons ago, and that's a genuinely fun game to play. Unfortunately, we didn't get that game here in North America because Activision still held the rights, and so we got their version of Ghostbusters 2, courtesy of Imagineering, who didn't exactly have the greatest track record on NES. Sure, they put out A Boy and His Blob, which some would consider a classic, but they also put out Barbie, Destination Earthstar, those horrible Simpsons video games, and the Space Shuttle Project. Make of that last one what you will, I really don't care. Anyway, based on the second film of the same name, obviously, Ghostbusters 2 is a side-scrolling action game where you guide a Ghostbuster from one side of the level to the other, shooting ghosts and other things, so there's some action at least. Controls are reversed. B button jumps while A button fires your slime gun, so that's a red flag right there. Another red flag. Pressing start sets up a ghost trap which traps ghosts. Pressing select does nothing. Pressing left or right on the D-pad moves your Ghostbuster, while pressing up or down aims the trajectory of your slime gun. We'll get to that in a little bit. What none of these buttons do on the Nintendo gamepad is pause the game, because Ghostbusters 2 lacks a pause feature. Pausing, of course, is what you do when you want to stop the game for a bit to take a break and come back to it later. You can't do that with this game. Why would you omit a feature that's been a regular thing on most Nintendo games at this time? You had a spare button on the controller that does nothing. Jumping is also borked. For some reason, pressing the B button will make you leap towards the left rather than just straight up. Now, if you're moving to the right and jump, you leap towards the right, that's fine. A minor concession is you do have some mid-air control, so it's not a total lost cause, but again, why? And then there's the aiming mechanism, where you press up and down on the D-pad to adjust the angle of your slime gun, which is a little animation to point this out, so it's kind of neat. And you basically shoot at that angle while moving. Basically a permanent hold feature of sorts you find in most run-and-gun games. I mean, I get the idea, but it's not the most intuitive setup. It's rather awkward feeling, and honestly, if you're just going to make a run-and-gun Ghostbusters game, which I think is the intent here, this game came out in 1990. The NES already had 2 Contra games under its belt. The template was right there, but I guess we needed to be imaginative at Imagineering. It doesn't quite work, and oh, by the way, Imagineering is no longer in business today, so take that as a further hint. So the controls are kind of rubbish from the get-go, and it doesn't get any better. You have 4 of these side-scrolling levels where you control one of the Ghostbusters, each assigned to a stage, so you can't pick one or the other in the player select or anything like that. Not that it really matters because they all play the same, and also the last level has you playing through the museum stage as all 4 Ghostbusters, which means you have to play that stage 4 times to beat the whole game, which is ludicrous because whatever. As for the stages themselves, you're basically moving to the right, somewhat atypical of platformers, but whatever. And you're shooting ghosts and Ghostbuster logos with your slime gun, the latter being a collectible that earns you an extra life if you nab 20 of them. And for some ghosts that are immune to the slime gun, you can lay down a ghost trap to capture any foes snared in the beam while it's active. You have an unlimited supply of ghost traps, which is nice, but only one can be laid on screen at a time, so you either have to kick it off screen eventually, or wait for it to fall off screen as you move onwards. So, playing the game, it seems like a bunch of random stuff is being tossed your way fast. Slimers dropping by, and sliming slime turds on the ground, random bouncing objects that you have to avoid, or hopefully be lucky enough to snare them in a trap before its long startup with the beam. And there is a bit of memorization involved in knowing what to expect and how to best be prepared in putting up with these things. And maybe sometimes you want to take things slow, but you can't because there's a time limit. That in itself is like whatever, time limits are in a lot of games. The really stupid thing is this small little tick-like turd that's constantly following you and pushing you to move onwards. It's small enough to be leaped over, but this tiny little fucker also acts as a wall closing inwards, and yes, the tick can kill you, so if you try to jump over it, you're just gonna land on the tick and you're going to die or get stunned or whatever. We already have the time limit to try and rush the player forwards. The game doesn't scroll to the right, so there's obviously no backtracking. This feels like overkill to me, and why? Whenever you take a hit, you lose a life, and once all your lives are lost, it's game over, but you have a couple continues to retry the level. The problem is that there's so much stuff coming at you at such quick speeds that it becomes nigh impossible to react to these things, even when you figured out how things work and what to expect and all that. The hit detection is not an exact science, to put it kindly. And you combine this with awkward jumping, physics, convoluted aiming mechanics, and state design that boils down to running along a straight line while a bunch of shit is thrown your way. 4 stages, but the final stage has you running it 4 times, so that's technically 7 stages of running to the left and having shit thrown your way with no rhyme or reason, and it never varies beyond that format. There are no boss fights, which some would see as a negative, but I'm like, thank fuck for that. This game is enough of a laxative from beyond the grave that I don't need the bowel pains from having to endure boss fights with this gimped gameplay. But then it gets worse because you also have a couple stages where you're driving the Ecto-1, or rather the Ecto-1A, the updated version in this movie. And unlike the first game, these are also side-scrolling levels where you are needing to avoid obstacles and run over speed arrows to get enough boost to leap across large chasms, which in New York seem somewhat realistic. Ecto-1A also has a slime gun that fires 2 shots, one straight ahead and one slightly upwards, the latter used to hit higher up items, or at least that's the working theory. You can crash into things a few times before losing a life, but getting slimed or falling into holes are instant kills, but getting slimed isn't so bad because you at least continue where you left off. And yeah, might as well. The jumping segments are a joke here. These require pitch-perfect jumps. You have to be at the right speed and jump at the right time in hopes of making it to the other side. And if you fall in the hole, you have to replay the whole level, which is just dandy. Usually, this jumping the black hole in New York involves using the speed arrows to gain that needed boost, but sometimes the arrows move around, which is always fun, he lied. So, yeah, this is awful. There's no reason to have Ecto-1, 1A, 2B, 3C, whatever, doing any platforming with these cars. The stages themselves are often a chore to play, they drag on for way too long, and only exist to serve how much better the driving segments were in the first Ghostbusters game on NES. Think about how much fail that entails to achieve such a feat. The only good part of the game, or rather the least bad part of the game I should be saying, is where you're controlling the Statue of Liberty in the penultimate level, and it sort of plays out like a little old school space shooter thing with random ghosts flying in patterns for you to shoot down with your torch. Lady Liberty can also launch a screen nuking book, and can withstand a couple hits before going under, and unlike the rest of the game, there's a damage meter to indicate how much damage she suffered, which would have been nice to have everywhere else, but whatever. There are bonus rounds where you could get some Ghostbuster icons for extra lives, and also there are invisible ghosts you have to fight towards the end of the level, which is like But yeah, this isn't very good. It's quite bad. And it's not just the gameplay that's bad, the graphics are also quite dreadful. You can make out some iconography, Slimers, logos, Ecto-1. I guess Winston stands out too, but only because they changed the skin color on the same generic Ghostbuster sprite used to represent all 4 characters. If not for the nameplate to identify the player at the start of each stage, I wouldn't have guessed who was who because they all look the same. But the rest of the in-game items tossed your way, bouncing head things and cones and things of that nature, no, they just look bad. Some of the stage backdrops look decent while others do not, but either way they clash with the ugly sprites. Boy and his Blob had the same problem, by the way, but that game was better than this, so that could get away with it. Cutscenes here aren't great looking, but the mugshots are top notch. The game over scene's great. it ought to be. You'll be seeing it often, especially early on. But yeah, this is not a great looking game by NES standards circa 1990, which... I don't know, what do we have up to this point? I rest my case. If I could point out one minor positive here, the music's okay. You've got a decent rendition of the Ghostbusters theme that plays out more often than I care for, and a couple other tracks that sound fine. There's actually an okayish, if not slightly off-key take on Jackie Wilson's Higher and Higher, which is another song from the movie that plays during the Liberty scene, so I guess credit for that. New Ghostbusters 2 has a better take on Flip City though, but then again everything about that game is better, so whatever. There's no missing words here. Ghostbusters 2 on NES is a dreadful game. And I get why people would say this is a better game than the first one was, because it's at least the kind of game they'd prefer to play, but that actually makes it worse. Ghostbusters 1 was a miserable failure on NES, but it was at least an interesting failure that tried something different. Side-scrollers on NES especially were a dime a dozen, and 5 years in, after so many greats in that vein, it is astonishing that there were still a few folks who had no fucking clue on how to make a remotely decent one, and even fewer that fumbled the ball so badly on even making a subpar one. Ghostbusters 2 isn't just a bad game. It's mind-numbing in its awfulness. The controls are borked and ill-advised, the stages are dull, repetitive, random dreck, the driving bits are a joke, and the graphics are dreadfully ugly. Some people are content to say this is better than the first game because there's action in it, and if that's the bare minimum for you, then you're way too easy to please, and sometimes I know the feeling. This is not one of those times. I don't like this game. This game sucks. I'd much rather be playing the other one. By which, of course, I mean the one from HAL Labs. What, you thought I was talking about the first game? Are you nuts? That game's also dreadful. Even the David Crane original isn't all that hype, so... That's what the kids say, right? Hype? Okay, whatever, I don't care. We're playing Simmons Quest next. Bye.